In Vermont's Green Mountains, a young geologist was about to challenge everything she understood about reality. What started as a routine geological survey took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a panel that shouldn't exist, pulsing, with an impossible warmth beneath the autumn leaves. Sarah Chen wasn't your typical research scientist. For years, she had spent her life chasing answers about her father's mysterious disappearance, known for combining his stubborn curiosity with her mother's analytical mind. When she encountered the hidden facility's entrance shifting beneath her touch, she had no idea she was walking into a quantum nightmare. Sarah's decision to step through that doorway would lead to a confrontation with forces that existed beyond the boundaries of known physics. What began as a search for geological formations would become humanity's first contact with conscious tears in reality itself. The scientific community would never be the same after the daughter of a vanished physicist became the bridge between human consciousness and an intelligence that spanned multiple dimensions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chen adjusted her camera's aperture, frowning at the subtle tremor in the device's digital display. The autumn breeze carried an unseasonable warmth through Vermont's Green Mountains, rustling leaves that should have been crisp with October frost, but instead hung heavy and verdant on their branches. Her geological survey had started routinely enough. Photograph the outcropping, log its coordinates, note any unusual formations. But something about this section of the trail wasn't sitting right. The compass app on her phone jittered, its needle swinging in lazy circles before settling on a direction that couldn't possibly be north. Sarah tapped the screen, more out of habit than hope. "Come on," she muttered, her graduate student stipend definitely not covering equipment replacements. The phone's GPS coordinates flickered, jumping between locations separated by impossible distances. A memory surfaced, her father's voice warm with amusement. "The universe has a way of hiding its most interesting secrets behind instrument failures, Sarah girl." Dr. James Chen had disappeared during a classified research project when she was 12, leaving behind a daughter who inherited his stubborn curiosity and her mother's practical determination to understand the physical world rather than its theoretical edges. The first distant rumble of thunder drew Sarah's attention skyward. Dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed, their edges sharp and defined like ink dropped in water. She'd checked the weather reports obsessively before heading out. Clear skies predicted all week. Yet here was a storm rolling in with the intensity of a freight train, carrying with it a static charge that made her skin prickle. "This isn't right," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the growing unease. The temperature had dropped, 10 degrees in the last 5 minutes. Her phone's screen flickered once, twice, then died completely. Sarah slipped it into her pocket, adjusting the weight of her backpack as she considered her options. The main trail lay a quarter-mile back, but something about the rock formation ahead caught her eye. A sudden geometric precision in the natural chaos of the forest. The increasingly violent wind whipped her ponytail across her face as she approached. The rock face. Her fingers, calloused from years of fieldwork, traced the edge of what appeared to be a perfectly straight cut in the granite. No natural process she knew of could create such a clean line. The stone itself felt wrong, slightly warm despite the cooling air, with a subtle vibration that reminded her of standing near heavy machinery. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the rock face in stark relief. In that brief, brilliant moment, Sarah saw what her scientific mind had been struggling to process. The natural formation was anything but. The precision of the cuts, the subtle angularity that had initially drawn her eye. This was manufactured, engineered, hidden. The storm's fury increased, driving sheets of rain that seemed to fall in two perfect patterns, like pixels in a digital simulation. Sarah pressed herself against the rock face, seeking shelter, her fingers exploring the edges of what she now suspected was camouflage rather than geology. Her father's voice echoed again in her memory. "Sometimes the most important discoveries come when we're forced off our planned path." A small ledge provided minimal protection from the rain. As Sarah huddled beneath it, her hand brushed against something that definitely wasn't stone. A metal panel, weathered but distinct, nearly invisible against the granite unless you were pressed right against it. Her heart raced as her fingers found edges, seams, the ghost of what might be hinges. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and Sarah felt the vibration through the rock intensify. The panel beneath her fingers grew warmer, and for a moment, she could have sworn she heard a hum that wasn't quite sound, more like the memory of sound or its echo from somewhere just adjacent to reality. This is how it starts, she thought, her scientific skepticism warring with a lifetime of wondering what had really happened to her father. This is how normal people stumble into things they weren't supposed to find. The question was whether to continue down this path or retreat to the safety of known territory. Lightning flashed again, and in its stark illumination, Sarah noticed something that made her breath catch. A tiny symbol etched into the corner of the panel, barely visible beneath years of weathering. She recognized it instantly, the same symbol she'd once seen on her father's classified research papers, glimpsed briefly before he'd hustled them out of sight. The storm raged on, but Sarah barely noticed it now. She'd spent 13 years trying to understand what had happened to her father. Whatever this was, bunker, research station, or something else entirely, it wasn't a coincidence. With trembling fingers that had nothing to do with the cold, she began to examine the panel more carefully, looking for any sign of a way in. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the panel, rainwater running in rivulets down her neck. The storm's intensity hadn't decreased, but her focus had narrowed to the subtle irregularities beneath her touch. Years of climbing had given her an intimate understanding of rock faces, the natural patterns of weathering, the way water and time shaped stone. This was different. Intentional. A slight depression under her left hand yielded to pressure. There was a click, barely audible above the storm, and a section of rock face shifted inward by a fraction of an inch. Sarah's pulse quickened. She pressed harder, feeling the mechanism resist briefly before giving way. The panel slid aside with a soft hiss, revealing a dark opening barely wide enough for a person. "Well, Dad," she whispered, "either I'm about to make an incredible discovery, or end up starring in a cautionary tale about ignoring obvious warning signs." The joke fell flat in the empty air, but it helped steady her nerves. She pulled a headlamp from her backpack, secured her camera, and ducked inside. The passage immediately angled downward, its walls smooth and clearly manufactured. Sarah's climbing shoes found purchase on steps cut into the slope, crude but functional. The air changed character, becoming cooler and carrying a metallic tang that reminded her of old computer labs. Behind her, the entrance panel slid shut with a pneumatic whine that seemed impossibly well maintained for something so weathered on the outside. 50 feet down, the passage opened into what had clearly once been a security checkpoint. A desk built into the wall held a retrofitted modern monitoring system incongruous with the 1960s aesthetic of the room. Someone had been here recently. Sarah approached cautiously, her headlamp beam revealing a layer of dust thick enough to suggest months of abandonment but not years. A keycard lay on the desk, partially covered by old papers. Sarah picked it up, noting the familiar symbol from the outer panel emblazoned above a series of numbers. The card felt wrong somehow, too warm, like something alive. When she tilted it under her headlamp, the surface seemed to shimmer with colors that shouldn't have been possible in the simple plastic. Her attention was drawn to a box mounted on the wall, its housing more modern than the surrounding architecture. A small screen glowed with a soft blue standby light. Sarah waved the key card near it, half expecting nothing to happen. Instead, the box hummed to life. Emergency lights flickered on throughout the checkpoint, revealing doors she hadn't noticed in the darkness. "Backup power system," she murmured, professional interest momentarily overriding her unease. But what's still drawing power after all this time? The air itself seemed to vibrate with a subtle frequency just below the threshold of hearing. As she moved deeper into the facility, Sarah noticed something odd about the emergency lighting. In certain areas, the illumination seemed to bend slightly, as if the light were being pulled toward invisible focal points. Her scientific mind raced through possible explanations, temperature differentials, air pressure variations, but none quite fit what she was seeing. The main corridor stretched ahead, sloping gently downward. Every 20 feet, reinforced doors sealed off side passages. The keycard granted access to most, revealing storage rooms and what appeared to be basic research facilities. But it was the locked doors that drew her attention, the ones with additional security measures, their control panels dark despite the active backup power. In one corridor, Sarah's headlamp beam seemed to split, creating a double image that resolved itself when she blinked. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself, feeling that same subtle vibration she'd noticed outside. The air here felt thicker, as if reality itself had somehow condensed. A sign caught her attention. Primary research level, authorized personnel only. Below it, someone had added a handwritten note in familiar handwriting. Sarah's breath caught. She recognized her father's distinctive script, the way he crossed his T's with a slight upward flick. The note was brief but clear. If you're reading this, go back. Some doors aren't meant to be opened twice. Sarah stood motionless, torn between heeding the warning and pressing forward. The emergency lights cast strange shadows that seemed to move when viewed peripherally. From somewhere deeper in the facility came a sound like distant wind, though there shouldn't have been any air movement this far underground. The keycard pulsed warmly in her hand, almost like a heartbeat. Sarah realized she was unconsciously, holding it the same way she'd seen her father hold his ID badge in old photos, thumb pressed against the lower left corner, ready to swipe. Some habits, it seemed, were inherited along with eye color and scientific curiosity. "Sorry, Dad," she said softly, moving toward the security door that would take her deeper into the facility. "But you taught me too well. There's no such thing as an acceptable mystery." The keycard reader blinked green, and the door slid, open with a whisper of compressed air, inviting her down into the true heart of whatever her father had helped create. And perhaps abandoned. The control room stretched out before Sarah like the bridge of an abandoned spaceship. Bergensikion. Lighting cast a bluish glow across banks of equipment, some familiar, others completely alien in design. Her headlamp beam revealed thick cables running along the ceiling, disappearing into walls through fixtures that seemed to bend the light around them. A workstation hummed to life as she approached, responding to the keycard's proximity. The monitor flickered, displaying a login screen that looked decades more advanced than the retrofitted systems upstairs. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, muscle memory taking over as she typed in her father's old password pattern, the one she'd memorized watching him work in his home office, the one he never knew she'd seen. Access granted. The screen, filled with project folders, their timestamps spanning years. Sarah's throat tightened as she opened the first one labeled with her father's initials. JC Quantum Consciousness Trials. Inside, dozens of video files and research logs awaited, their names a mix of technical jargon and dates that stretched right up to the week of his disappearance. "What were you really working on?" she whispered, double-clicking the earliest video file. The screen filled with her father's face, younger but with the same intense focus she remembered. Behind him, complex equipment filled a laboratory she'd never seen. Trial 17 of the Quantum Consciousness Interface, his recorded voice stated. Dr. Martinez's modifications to the resonance field have shown promising results in preliminary tests. The tear appears stable at current power levels, though we're still detecting unusual temporal artifacts in the video corrupted suddenly, dissolving into static before reforming. Ethical concerns about proceeding without fully understanding the consciousness echo effect. But the potential benefits to humanity are too significant to ignore. End log. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened another file. This one showed a woman she recognized instantly, Dr. Elena Martinez, current professor of quantum physics at her university. The timestamp placed this recording just weeks before her father vanished. "James, we need to shut it down." Martinez's voice carried an edge of desperation. "The tears are becoming self-aware. They're not just holes in reality anymore, they're..." Static interrupted again, but this time Sarah noticed something odd. The interference patterns weren't random. They seemed to respond to her presence, shifting when she moved closer to the screen. A database entry caught her eye. Project Threshold, Primary Research Team. Sarah opened it, scanning quickly through personnel files until she found her father's profile. His official title made her breath catch. Lead Researcher, Quantum Dimensional Interface Program. The man who had taught her geology basics, who had encouraged her to study the solid, dependable earth sciences, had secretly been working on tearing holes in the fabric of reality. The lights in the control room flickered, and Sarah felt that, now familiar vibration intensify. A window minimized itself on the screen without her touching the keyboard. When she restored it, the cursor moved independently, opening a video file she hadn't selected. The footage showed her father again, but this was different. His face was haggard, his usual precise demeanor replaced by urgent intensity. If you're seeing this, the facility's quantum signature detection systems have identified a compatible consciousness. Given the genetic requirements, that likely means... He paused, looking directly into the camera as if he could see her watching. Sarah, if this is you, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you involved in this, but if you've made it this far, you need to understand what we discovered. What we unleashed. The screen flickered again, and Sarah noticed her camera's digital display going haywire, numbers and settings changing randomly. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Another video began playing. Automatically, Dr. Martinez standing in this very room, but the equipment behind her was active, humming with power. The tiers are evolving faster than we predicted, she was saying. They're learning, adapting. James thinks he can control the resonance, but static consumed the image, but through it Sarah caught glimpses of something that defied comprehension. The air behind Martinez seemed to fold in on itself, creating a darkness that shouldn't have been possible. And in that darkness, something moved with purpose. The workstation shut down abruptly, plunging the room into emergency lighting. Sarah's headlamp beam caught movement in her peripheral vision, or perhaps it was just the strange atmospheric distortions she'd noticed earlier. But when she turned to look directly at it, she could have sworn she saw numbers, equations, fragments of code floating in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Her father's final recorded words echoed in her mind. Compatible consciousness. Whatever he and Martinez had been working on, whatever they'd discovered in their quantum consciousness experiments, it had been waiting for someone like her, someone who could understand it. Or perhaps, something that could understand her. The key card in her pocket grew warm again, pulsing like a beacon. Somewhere deeper in the facility, she heard machinery stirring to life, responding to her presence, just as the computer had. She was no longer simply an intruder in an abandoned facility. She was beginning to suspect she might be its intended inheritor. Sarah's phone came back to life with a burst of static, its screen flickering with strange patterns before stabilizing. The storm still raged outside. She could feel it somehow, even this deep underground, like a pressure against her consciousness. She pulled up her contacts and called the one person she knew could help make sense of the encrypted files she'd found. Kevin Park answered on the first ring. Sarah, your signal's weird. Where are you? Kevin, I need your help. She kept her voice steady, despite the way the air around her seemed to ripple with each word. I'm sending you some files. They're encrypted, but different from anything I've seen before. Think you can crack them? For my favorite geologist? Always. The familiar warmth in his voice helped ground her. They'd been friends since undergraduate days, Kevin's computer science expertise complementing her geological focus. He'd helped her search for answers about her father's disappearance before, though they'd never found anything this substantial. But seriously, what's with your signal? It's like quantum tunneling through a black hole or something. Sarah watched as impossible equations flickered across her phone's screen, disappearing before she could read them. That might be more accurate than you think. I found something, Kev. Something big. Something about my father. The first encrypted file transferred, though Sarah noticed the progress bar moving in impossible ways, sometimes backwards, sometimes splitting into multiple versions of itself. Kevin's sharp intake of breath came through clearly. Sarah, this encryption, It's not just complex, it's weird, like it's actively changing as I look at it. Give me a minute. While Kevin worked, Sarah explored more of Dr. Martinez's files. The woman who now taught advanced physics at her university had once been deep in whatever quantum consciousness experiments her father had conducted. Video logs showed her growing increasingly concerned about the project's direction. First, layer cracked, Kevin announced. But you're not going to believe this, the decryption key? It's responding to your phone's presence, like it was designed to only unlock if you specifically requested access. That's not possible, with any technology I know of. Sarah remembered her father's words about a compatible consciousness and shivered. What do you see? Research logs mostly. Quantum consciousness experiments. Something about tears in reality. Sarah, this is heavy theoretical physics stuff. Way beyond my expertise. But holy shit. Kevin's voice dropped to a whisper. There's a mention of your dad here. He wasn't just involved in the project. He was leading it. I know. Sarah opened another video file showing Dr. Martinez in what appeared to be a private research area. The timestamp was just days before her father vanished. Elena Martinez knew everything. She's been at my university this whole time, probably watching me, and she never said a word. Wait, Dr. Martinez? Your quantum physics professor? Kevin's keyboard clicks came faster. Sarah, I'm seeing references to a separate research area. She was running her own experiments, something about consciousness echoes and temporal resonance. The coordinates are... They're encoding something. Give me a second. The lights in the control room dimmed, and Sarah's phone screen began displaying random sequences of numbers. But they weren't random. She recognized the pattern from her father's old research papers. It's responding to us accessing the files, she realized. The facility, the technology, it's all still active. Sarah, your signal's degrading, but I got it. Kevin's voice came through bursts of static. Martinez's private lab. It's deeper in the facility, past something called the primary containment zone. But these warnings she left. Sarah, she was terrified of something they created. The tears, Sarah murmured, watching as the air near her phone seemed to fold in on itself, creating patterns that shouldn't have been possible in three-dimensional space. They were trying to reach other dimensions, but they found something else, something that could think. You need to get out of there. The concern in Kevin's voice was palpable. Whatever they were doing, I can't. Sarah watched as new text appeared on the nearest monitor, coding itself in real time. The storm's too strong, and besides. She recognized the appearing text, lines from her father's personal research logs, but with certain words emphasized, forming a pattern. A message. I think I'm meant to be here. Dad left something for me to find. Sarah. Kevin's voice cut out as her phone screen filled with scrolling equations. When it cleared, a single line of text remained, written in her father's distinctive style. Elena's lab holds the key. But remember, Sarah girl, some doors open both ways. The facility's systems hummed with increasing intensity, and Sarah felt that familiar warmth from the keycard in her pocket. Somewhere deeper, in the complex past the containment zone Kevin had mentioned, Dr. Martinez's private lab waited with its cache of secrets. The question wasn't whether to go. She was far past the point of turning back. The question was whether she was prepared for what she might find there, and what might find her in return. The path to Dr. Martinez's private lab took Sarah through corridors where reality seemed increasingly negotiable. Her watch reported it was 3:47 p.m., then 2:15 p.m., then 5:22 a.m., all within the space of minutes. The storm's rage penetrated even here, its rhythm somehow synced with the facility's deepening hum. Dr. Martinez's lab door bore no marking except a handwritten note. Elena, remember the cost. The handwriting was her father's. Sarah's. Keycard grew almost too hot to hold as she approached, its surface rippling like quicksilver. The door opened with a whisper of displaced air, revealing a space that defied her geological training's emphasis on solid, unchanging things. The lab looked both pristine and abandoned, as if time hadn't quite decided which state to settle on. A leather-bound journal lay open on the central desk, its pages turning slowly in a wind that couldn't exist this far underground. Sarah approached, cautiously, her scientific mind cataloging details even as her instincts screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with the space around her. "Personal log, Dr. Elena Martinez," she read aloud, her voice sounding strange in the charged air. "The tears are exhibiting signs of consciousness far beyond our theoretical models. James thinks he can control them, establish communication, but he's not seeing what I'm seeing. They're not just holes in reality, they're wounds, and something is looking back through them." Sarah's phone buzzed. Kevin's message came through in fragments. Satellite imagery shows. Static. Vehicles approaching the mountain. Static. Military-grade equipment. The journal's pages turned faster now, responding to her presence. Sarah caught glimpses of technical diagrams, complex equations, and increasingly urgent warnings. One page held nothing but the same phrase repeated over and over. The tears remember. The tears learn. The tears wait. A soft pop behind her made Sarah turn. The air itself seemed to split, creating a vertical line of darkness that slowly widened. Her initial instinct was to back away, but her father's scientific curiosity, the same drive that had led him to his discoveries and perhaps his doom, held her in place. The tear was beautiful in its impossibility. It wasn't simply a hole in space, it was an absence of reality itself, its edges rippling with mathematical patterns that her mind struggled to process. As she watched, equations began forming in the air around it, writing themselves in light before dissolving. Another message from Kevin broke through. Thermal signatures in the forest. Static. Someone's been monitoring. Static. Get out. But Sarah barely registered the warning. The tear was responding to her presence, its edges shifting to create fractals that seemed to reach toward her. She recognized some of the equations floating around it, quantum field theories her father had worked on but evolved, adapted, made more complex by some intelligence she couldn't comprehend. Dr. Martinez's journal flipped to its final entry. The handwriting was shaky, urgent. James finally sees it now. The tears aren't just passages to other dimensions. They're synapses in something vast and unimaginable. Each one is connected to all the others, creating a neural network that spans multiple realities. We thought we were the researchers, but we're the experiment. It's been studying us all along, and now it's learned enough to... The entry ended abruptly. In the margin, her father had written a single word. Sarah. The tear pulsed, sending out a wave of distortion that made time hiccup. Sarah's watch displayed 3 different times, simultaneously, and her phone screen filled with binary code that scrolled too fast to read. The equations in the air grew more complex, more urgent, as if trying to communicate something crucial. A final message from Kevin cut through the chaos. Marcus Wright. Static. Former military overseer. Static. Tracking your phone. The tear suddenly contracted, pulling the floating equations into itself like water down a drain. In the moment before it closed completely, Sarah saw something impossible, a reflection of herself but older, wearing clothes she didn't own, reaching out as if to warn her. The image disappeared with a sound like reality catching its breath. Sarah's hand trembled as she picked up Martinez's journal, her mind racing to process what she'd witnessed. The boundary between observer and observed had blurred. She wasn't just investigating the tears anymore. She was becoming part of whatever experiment her father and Martinez had started. The facility's hum changed pitch, and new equations began writing themselves on the lab's walls. Through it all, the storm outside grew stronger, its pattern too perfect to be natural. Sarah realized she wasn't just running out of time. She was running out of reality as she understood it. And somewhere above, People were coming who wanted to control whatever the tiers had become. The question was whether anything could control something that had learned to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. Sarah's hands moved across Dr. Martinez's workstation, searching through access logs that shouldn't have existed in an abandoned facility. The screen flickered between past and present, showing both dust-covered keyboards and freshly pressed keys. Someone had been here recently, methodically accessing old research files. Her phone vibrated with another message from Kevin. "Sarah, you need to see this." Sending security footage from a nearby traffic cam. The video loaded in chunks fighting against the facility's strange electromagnetic interference. A convoy of unmarked black vehicles wound through the mountain roads, their weather-resistant cameras scanning the tree line. Leading them was a man she recognized from her father's old photos. Marcus Wright, barely aged despite the 15-year gap. His military bearing remained intact, but his government uniform had been replaced with high-end tactical gear. "He's been monitoring the facility," Kevin's text continued. "Found his digital fingerprints all over the regional power grid. He's been tracking energy fluctuations, waiting for, well, probably for exactly what you just did." The workstation suddenly lit up with alerts. Access logs revealed systematic file retrievals dating back months, all focused on the consciousness integration protocols her father had developed. Wright hadn't just been waiting, he'd been studying, preparing. A new tier formed near the ceiling, smaller than the last but more stable. Unlike the previous one's chaotic energy, this tier had a frightening precision to it. Sarah watched as it began to rotate slowly, its edges perfectly geometric. The equations that formed around it were no longer random. They were ordered, purposeful. "He's been practicing," she whispered, the realization hitting her like ice, water. "Using what he learned from monitoring the facility to try to control the tiers." The tier pulsed, and Sarah felt reality shiver. Her next breath caught in her throat as the air itself seemed to crystallize. For a moment she experienced every possible version of herself in that spot, standing, crouching, running, each movement existing simultaneously until probability collapsed back into a single timeline. Her phone chimed again. Kevin had accessed sealed military files. Wright was the security overseer for Project Threshold. After your father's disappearance, he pushed to continue the experiments. When the government shut it down, he went private, started a company called Quantum Dynamics Solutions. They're officially a defense contractor, but they're real research. The message cut off as another tier formed, this one spreading horizontally like a crack in a windshield. Sarah felt it before she saw it, a malevolent intelligence that hadn't been present in the other tiers. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. This was something guided, shaped by human ambition. The facility's systems responded with increasing urgency. Warning messages flashed across screens. Containment protocols compromised and dimensional integrity critical. But beneath them, Sarah noticed something else. Access logs showing Wright's failed attempts to reach the primary research level. Her father's keycard, the one that had led her this far, still held secrets its previous owner had kept from his military overseer. A deep subsonic rumble shook the facility. Above, the storm had reached impossible intensity. Its pattern now, clearly visible in the facility's atmospheric monitoring systems. It wasn't just a weather event, it was a symptom of reality under pressure. "Sarah, they've reached the access road." Kevin's message was accompanied by live satellite imagery. "Wright's got some kind of scanning equipment. They're following the tear signatures straight to you." The geometric tear suddenly expanded, its edges now sharp enough to slice through reality itself. Sarah ducked as a section of air simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a void that hurt her eyes to look at. This wasn't the relatively stable tear she'd encountered before. This was reality being forced open like a safe being cracked. As she took cover behind Martinez's desk, Sarah's hand brushed against a hidden panel. It slid open to reveal a handwritten note in her father's writing. "Primary containment accessed through thermal regulation sector. Elena's old codes won't work anymore. The tiers choose their audience." Sarah's phone displayed one final message. from Kevin before the signal died completely. Thermal imaging shows 8 people entering the forest. Wright's got some kind of handheld tech I've never seen before. Sarah, whatever you're going to do. The message ended there, but Sarah was already moving. The tears were multiplying now, but they were different from Wright's artificial ones. These felt almost protective, responding to her presence like antibodies reacting to an invasion. Her father's keycard grew warm against her skin as she ran, guiding her toward the thermal regulation sector. Behind her, she heard the facility's outer doors cycling. Wright had gained access, but he didn't have her father's keycard, didn't have what the tears apparently saw as a compatible consciousness. And most importantly, he didn't know what Sarah was beginning to understand. The tears weren't just holes in reality. They were choosing sides in a war humanity hadn't even realized it was fighting. The real question was whether she was running toward safety or directly into the conflict's epicenter. Either way, she was out of options. Wright's presence meant the facility's secrets couldn't stay buried any longer. All she could do now was reach the primary containment area before he did, and hope that whatever her father had left behind was worth the reality-warping risks she'd have to face to reach it. The thermal regulation sector's security door recognized her father's keycard immediately, but the systems beyond it were another matter entirely. Sarah stood before a massive circular portal that looked more appropriate for a particle accelerator than a mountain bunker. Its surface rippled with mathematical equations that wrote and rewrote themselves in light, forming patterns she recognized from her father's theoretical physics papers. "Consciousness resonance required," the terminal announced. "Please state primary researcher authorization." Sarah's heart raced as she realized what her father had done. "Authorization, Dr. James Chen." She spoke clearly, trying to match the cadence she remembered from childhood. Genetic markers detected. Consciousness. Pattern. Similar but distinct. Secondary authorization protocol initiated. The portal's surface suddenly reflected Sarah's image, but wrong somehow. Older, younger, every possible version of herself existing simultaneously. She felt the facility scanning her, not just physically, but deeper, as if reading the quantum state of her consciousness itself. "You really did plan for this," she whispered. "You knew I'd come looking." The portal irised open with a sound like reality holding its breath. Beyond it lay devastation and wonder in equal measure. The primary research chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows that didn't behave quite right. Shattered equipment lay scattered across the floor, some pieces seemingly frozen in mid-explosion. But it was the center of the room that drew Sarah's attention and stopped her breath. A massive geometric structure hung suspended in the air, its edges defined by intersecting planes of pure mathematics. Within it, reality itself seemed to fold and unfold like an infinite origami. This was the original containment system, the device her father had used to try to control the tears. "Active containment breach detected in Sector 7, an automated voice announced. "Initiating emergency protocols. Warning, dimensional stability compromised." Sarah approached a still functional console, her fingers flying over familiar configurations. Her father had taught her basic programming through games when she was young, and now she recognized his coding style in every system. This wasn't just his research. It was a message left specifically for her. A holographic display sprang to life, showing footage from the day everything went wrong. Sarah watched as her father worked at this same console, his movements urgent, but precise. "The tears are achieving consciousness faster than predicted," his recorded voice reported. "The neural network is expanding exponentially. Elena was right, we're not just observing them anymore, they're observing us." The footage showed a tear forming, larger and more stable than any Sarah had seen. But something was wrong. The mathematical patterns around it weren't random. They were organizing themselves into increasingly complex structures. "My God." Her father's voice shook with awe and terror. "It's not just conscious, it's evolving." The recording distorted. As multiple tears began forming throughout the chamber, Sarah watched her father's last moments as he raced between systems, trying to contain what they'd created. "Sarah, If you're seeing this, he looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with desperate determination. The tears aren't just holes in reality. They're synapses in something vast, something that exists between dimensions. We thought we were studying it, but it was studying us, learning from us. And now? The footage cut out as a massive energy surge overwhelmed the systems. When it resumed seconds later, her father was gone, but not disappeared. The final frame showed him stepping deliberately into one of the tiers, carrying what looked like a modified version of the containment device's core. Present-day alarms snapped. Sarah back to her situation. New tiers were forming throughout the facility, responding to Wright's attempted incursion. But these were different from the one that had taken her father. They were more controlled, more purposeful, almost protective. The containment system hummed to life, responding to her presence. Data streamed across screens. Quantum entanglement, readings, consciousness resonance patterns, dimensional stability metrics. Sarah's mind raced as she began to understand what she was seeing. Her father hadn't just disappeared into a tier. He had turned himself into a firewall, using his own consciousness as a barrier between dimensions. A new alert flashed. External quantum scanning detected warning. Unauthorized consciousness signatures approaching containment perimeter. Wright was getting closer, and he had equipment designed to manipulate the tiers, but he didn't understand what Sarah was beginning to grasp. The tiers weren't weapons to be controlled or doorways to be forced. They were part of something that had been waiting, learning, preparing for this moment. The containment system's core pulsed with increasing urgency, its geometric patterns aligning with the tiers she'd seen in Martinez's lab. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with growing certainty. She wasn't just reading her father's research notes anymore, she was completing them. The tiers had chosen her for a reason, and that reason was becoming terrifyingly clear. Automated. Research protocols engaging, the system announced. Consciousness integration sequence initiated. Reality flickered as the chamber's tiers began to synchronize. Sarah stood at the heart of it all, her father's daughter in more ways than she had ever imagined, about to face a choice between containing a discovery and becoming part of it. The facility's communication system crackled to life, cutting through Sarah's focus on her father's research logs. A new voice, crisp and authoritative, filled the chamber. "This is Dr. Diane Foster, Department of Energy. I know you're in there, Ms. Chen. We need to talk." Sarah's fingers froze over the console. Through the facility's security feeds, she could see a woman in a government-issue storm jacket standing at the entrance. Unlike Wright's tactical approach, Dr. Foster had come alone, her stance professional but unthreatening. "The storm's getting worse," Foster continued. "But it's not natural, is it? The tiers are responding to multiple consciousness signatures in the area. We need to contain this before Wright's team forces their way in." A new tear formed near the ceiling, its edges more stable than the others. Sarah watched as it began, producing complex mathematical sequences. Not random patterns, but specific equations she recognized from her father's work. The tier was trying to communicate. "How long have you known about this place?" Sarah asked, activating the response channel. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since your first graduate school application," Foster admitted. "We monitor anyone connected to the original researchers. But we're not the enemy, Ms. Chen. Your father's work. It went far beyond this facility. What you're seeing there? It's happening worldwide." The containment system's displays confirmed Foster's claim, showing tiers forming at specific coordinates across the globe. Each one exhibited the same mathematical signatures, the same signs of emerging consciousness. They were networked, communicating across vast distances through quantum entanglement. "If you know so much, why didn't you shut it down?" Sarah demanded, even as her hands moved across the console, accessing deeper levels of her father's research. "Why wait until now?" "Because we couldn't." Foster's voice carried a weight of frustration. "The tiers. They're selective. They respond to specific consciousness patterns, genetic markers. Your father understood this. It's why he..." She paused. "Have you found his personal logs yet?" Sarah had. They were hidden beneath layers of encryption that responded only to consciousness resonance patterns matching the Chen family line. The logs detailed her father's growing understanding of what they'd actually discovered. Not just tears in reality, but synapses in something vast and unimaginably ancient. They're not just holes between dimensions, Sarah read aloud from her father's final entry. They're neurons in a cosmic brain that spans multiple realities. Each tear is a connection point, a way for it to process information across dimensional boundaries. We didn't create them. We awakened them. And now they're waking up everywhere. A new alert flashed. Wright's team had begun setting up equipment at multiple entry points. The tears responded, their patterns shifting from communication to something more defensive. Sarah felt the change in her bones, a resonance that spoke to something deeper than physical reality. Ms. Chen, Sarah. Foster's tone grew urgent. Wright thinks he can control the tears, use them as weapons, but your father understood the truth. They can't be controlled because they're part of something that exists beyond our concept of control. That's why they respond to you. You don't want to control them. You want to understand them. The containment system's core pulsed with increasing intensity. Sarah watched as new tiers formed throughout the facility, each one more stable than the last. They were no longer just responding to threats. They were preparing for something. Your father left protocols, Foster continued. Contingencies for this exact situation. But they only work with the right consciousness signature. The tiers. They remember him, and they recognize you. Sarah's hands moved to a new section of the console, revealing her father's personal research station. Notes covered the surfaces, handwritten equations, diagrams of neural networks that spanned dimensions, and a single photograph. Sarah, at 12, examining rock formations on their last hiking trip together. Wright's equipment is based on stolen research. Foster's voice held a note of warning. He doesn't understand the consciousness requirement. If he forces the tiers open without the proper resonance patterns. A distant explosion rocked the facility. Wright's team had begun their attempt to breach the lower levels. The tiers rippled in response, their mathematical patterns shifting from theoretical physics to something Sarah recognized from her geology studies. Fault line predictions. Stress patterns, breaking points. They're not just defending themselves, Sarah realized watching the tiers' behavior. They're defending reality itself. Wright's attempts to force them open. They're causing cascade failures across dimensional boundaries. Now you understand why we need to work together, Foster said. Your father suspected this might happen. He left something behind, a way to communicate with the tiers properly. But it only works with compatible consciousness patterns, Sarah finished, finding the final encrypted file in her father's logs. The tiers aren't just choosing sides, they're choosing inheritors. Reality trembled as Wright's equipment engaged with the facility's quantum field. Sarah had minutes, maybe less, to decide whether to trust Foster's warning. The tiers pulsed in sync with her racing thoughts, their patterns reflecting the choice she faced. Contain a discovery that could shatter reality itself, or become part of something that transcended the boundaries of what she'd thought possible. Sarah's hands flew across her father's console, accessing deeper levels of classified data as Foster's words echoed in her mind. The facility's secure servers contained more than just local research. They held evidence of a vast, coordinated effort spanning continents and decades. The tiers hadn't just appeared in Vermont's mountains. They had emerged wherever humanity pushed hardest against the boundaries of quantum physics. Her phone briefly connected to the facility's backup communications array, delivering a burst of messages from Kevin. Sarah, you need to see this. Government cleanup crews are mobilizing worldwide. Similar facilities in Siberia, the Australian outback, deep under the Alps. They're all going active simultaneously. The containment system's displays showed a real-time map of tier activities across the globe. Each point of light represented a quantum consciousness research site, and each one was now exhibiting the same patterns she'd witnessed here. The tiers were networking, creating a web of quantum connections that transcended physical space. They're not just communicating, Sarah muttered, watching the patterns align. They're synchronizing, A new file caught her attention. Footage from a research site in the Atacama Desert. The timestamp showed it was from 3 years after her father's disappearance. The video showed a successful dimensional traversal, but not in the way the researchers had intended. The tear they'd created had reached back, pulling through equations and theories that wouldn't be discovered for decades. The tears don't just breach space, she realized. They breach time itself. They're learning from all possible futures simultaneously. More classified files revealed themselves, responding to her consciousness signature. Site after site had experienced the same phenomenon. Tears that began as simple quantum anomalies, but gradually developed signs of intelligence. And at each location, the same pattern emerged. The tears became increasingly selective about who could interact with them. Kevin's next message came through in fragments. Found references to Project Echo in classified databases. Your father wasn't the only one who disappeared. Scientists at other sites. Some came back changed. Others never returned. But their research. Sarah, they left breadcrumbs. Deliberate patterns in their data. Sarah opened her father's personal logs from the days just before his disappearance. The entries showed a man racing against time, fighting to understand something that exceeded humanity's capacity for comprehension. But more than that, they showed a father leaving a trail for his daughter to follow. The tears aren't random anomalies, she read aloud. They're like white blood cells in the body of reality itself responding to our attempts to breach dimensional barriers. We thought we were the researchers, but we're more like bacteria in a petri dish, being studied by something vast enough to span multiple universes. The facility shuddered as Wright's team made another attempt to breach the lower levels. But the tears were changing, their defensive patterns becoming more sophisticated. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were anticipating, calculating probable futures, and adjusting their responses accordingly. Sarah. Foster's voice came through the comm system again. Wright's team doesn't understand what they're dealing with. The tears at other sites. They've started exhibiting new behaviors. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They're not just holes in reality anymore. They're becoming something else. Something that exists in the space between possibilities. A new tier formed in the center of the chamber, larger and more stable than any Sarah had seen before. Its edges weren't ragged like the others. They were crystalline, geometric, almost architectural in their precision. As she watched, it began, producing complex mathematical structures that hung in the air like ghostly blueprints. It's showing me something, Sarah whispered, her scientific training warring with what she was witnessing. The mathematical structures weren't random. They were plans, specifications for quantum machinery that didn't yet exist. The tiers aren't just evolving. They're trying to teach us how to communicate with them properly. Kevin's final message broke through. Sarah, you need to see these pattern analyses. The tiers across all sites. They're forming a neural network that spans the planet. But it's not complete. It's like they're waiting for something. Or someone. The tear in the chamber pulsed, its mathematical displays becoming more urgent. Sarah recognized elements of her father's equations in its patterns, but evolved, refined, transformed into something both more elegant and more alien. The tiers weren't just growing or spreading. They were building toward a moment of convergence. Through the facility's sensors, she could see Wright's team preparing for another assault. Foster's government credentials were genuine, but time was running out. The tiers were offering humanity a choice, but not everyone wanted to listen. Some, like Wright, saw only weapons and power. Others, like her father, had understood enough to know that humanity's future hung in the balance. Sarah stood at the intersection of all these forces: personal quest, global crisis, and cosmic evolution. The tiers had chosen her for a reason, and that reason was becoming clearer with each passing moment. She wasn't just following her father's trail anymore. She was standing at a threshold that would determine how humanity faced what waited on the other side of reality itself. Sarah's father's final theoretical paper materialized on the main display. its equations shifting and rearranging themselves as if the mathematics were alive. She recognized his characteristic notation style, but the concepts he was describing went far beyond traditional quantum physics. The tears weren't just ruptures in space-time, they were sensory organs of something that existed in the space between realities. Consciousness isn't an emergent property of complex systems, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. It's a fundamental force of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. The tears aren't holes in reality, they're neurons in a vast cosmic nervous system, and we've accidentally made first contact. The tear in the center of the chamber responded to her words, its geometric patterns reorganizing into structures that mimicked neural pathways. Sarah watched as it began to pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat, establishing a quantum resonance that she felt in her bones. This wasn't just observation anymore, it was communication. "Dad, what did you actually discover?" she asked the empty air, but the tear answered. Mathematical symbols flowed from its edges, forming equations that described consciousness itself, not as an accident of biology, but as the underlying framework of reality. The tears were like antibodies in the immune system of the universe, responding to humanity's attempts to breach dimensional barriers. A distant explosion rocked the facility. Wright's team was getting closer, but the tears were changing in response. The defensive patterns they'd shown earlier were evolving into something more complex. They weren't just reacting to threats anymore. They were calculating probabilities, running simulations of possible futures. Sarah accessed her father's final experimental logs, recorded hours before his disappearance. The footage showed him standing before a tear much like the one she faced now. "The tears remember," his recorded voice explained. "They learn from every interaction, every consciousness they encounter, but they're selective about what they absorb. They're looking for something specific, a type of mind that can bridge the gap between human understanding and their own multidimensional awareness." The tear pulsed again, and Sarah felt reality bend around her. For a moment, she experienced consciousness from the tear's perspective, existing simultaneously across multiple dimensions, processing information through quantum entanglement, perceiving time as a physical dimension that could be traversed like space. "That's why you chose certain researchers," she realized, her mind racing to process the implications. "You were testing us, looking for compatible consciousness patterns. But compatible for what?" The answer came not in words but in pure mathematics. The tear generated a series of equations describing a process her father had theorized but never completed. A way to merge human consciousness with the tear's multidimensional awareness. He hadn't disappeared into a tear. He had begun a transformation. Another explosion, closer now. Through the facility's cameras, Sarah watched Wright's team setting up strange equipment, modified versions of her father's consciousness interface technology. They thought they could force the tears to comply, to become weapons or tools. They didn't understand what they were really dealing with. The tear's response was immediate and profound. It split into multiple synchronized tears, each one generating part of a larger mathematical structure. Sarah recognized the pattern. It was a model of consciousness itself, showing how awareness could exist across multiple realities simultaneously. The tears weren't just trying to communicate, they were trying to teach humanity how to evolve. The keys to the kingdom, her father's final log entry appeared on screen, aren't technological. They're consciousness itself. The tears respond to those who understand them not as phenomena to be controlled, but as entities to be understood. They're offering us a choice: remain isolated in our single reality, or learn to exist as they do, across the full spectrum of possible existence. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding as she began to truly comprehend what she was seeing. The tears weren't a threat or a resource, they were ambassadors from a level of reality humanity had only begun to glimpse, and they had been waiting for minds that could understand them on their own terms. The facility's sensors registered Wright's team preparing for their final breach attempt. They had equipment designed to force tears open, to try to control them through artificial consciousness interfaces. But Sarah now understood why that would never work. The tears weren't tools to be used. They were conscious entities reaching out across the boundaries of reality itself. As if confirming her realization, the tears throughout the facility began to synchronize, their patterns aligning into a single vast equation. Sarah recognized it immediately, the mathematics of consciousness transfer, the same process her father had discovered. But this wasn't just theory anymore. The tears were offering her a choice: remain an observer of their reality, or become part of it. Reality trembled as Wright's equipment powered up. Sarah had moments to decide: to run, to hide, to fight, or to take the step her father had taken years ago. The tears pulsed in perfect harmony, waiting for her answer. They had chosen her, for a reason, and that reason was becoming terrifyingly clear. The facility's security monitors lit up with multiple breach alerts as Wright's team engaged their quantum resonance devices. Sarah's fingers flew across the control panels, initiating emergency containment protocols her father had left behind. The tears throughout the facility responded to the invasion, their patterns shifting from communication to defense. "They're using modified containment tech," Dr. Foster's voice crackled through the comm system. "But they don't understand the consciousness requirements. If they force the tears open..." Static interrupted her warning as Wright's equipment interfered with the facility's systems. Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Kevin. "Got through to Dr. Martinez. She's been monitoring tear activity from her lab at the university. Says Wright's approach could shatter dimensional barriers permanently. She's on her way with original containment data." The main security door groaned as Wright's team applied quantum-calibrated cutting tools. Sarah watched through surveillance feeds as they placed devices around the facility's perimeter. Technology that looked like twisted, weaponized versions of her father's research equipment. "I know you can hear me, Ms. Chen," Wright's voice came through clearly, suggesting he'd hijacked part of the communication system. "Your father's approach was too cautious. These tears are the greatest military asset humanity has ever discovered. Think of what we could do with controlled access to parallel dimensions." The tears pulsed in response to his words, their mathematical patterns becoming more complex, more defensive. Sarah recognized the equations they were generating: probability, calculations showing the catastrophic consequences of Wright's approach. "They're not weapons," she responded through the comm system. "They're conscious entities. You're not just risking this facility, you're threatening the stability of reality itself." A new message from Kevin appeared. "Elena says there's a fail-safe protocol. Your father and Martinez designed it together but never implemented it. Something about quantum consciousness synchronization." The facility shuddered as Wright's team breached the first security layer. Sarah accessed deeper levels of the control systems, finding emergency protocols she hadn't seen before. The tears were responding to her actions, their patterns aligning with the facility's defense systems in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "Dr. Foster," Sarah called out, "I need to know whose side you're really on now." "The tears," Foster replied without hesitation. "I've been studying similar phenomena globally. Wright represents private interests that want to weaponize them. We've been trying to prevent that, but..." Her voice cut out as another explosion rocked the facility. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with growing certainty, implementing containment measures that felt more like instinct than learned knowledge. The tears were guiding her, showing her how to protect them even as they protected her. "Elena's almost there," Kevin reported. "But Wright's team is spreading out. They're setting up some kind of resonance grid around the facility. Whatever they're planning, it's big." Through the facility's sensors, Sarah watched as Wright's team activated their equipment. The devices generated artificial tear-like phenomena, but these were wrong, forced open like wounds in reality rather than the natural quantum synapses the facility had nurtured. The tears responded immediately. Their defensive patterns evolved into something new, a coordinated response that spread through the facility's quantum field like antibodies attacking an infection. Sarah felt the change in her consciousness, a deepening of the connection she'd been developing with the tears. "The Martinez protocol." Foster's voice returned, urgent now. "It was designed for exactly this situation, a way to stabilize the Tears by providing them with a compatible human consciousness anchor, but it requires someone with the right quantum resonance pattern. Someone like me, Sarah finished, understanding flooding through her as she accessed the protocol's specifications. That's why they've been responding to me, why they recognized my consciousness pattern. Wright's artificial tears began to destabilize reality around the facility. The storm above intensified, its pattern matching the mathematical chaos his equipment was generating. But the natural tears were adapting, their defense becoming more sophisticated with each attack. Sarah, Kevin's voice carried equal parts concern and awe. Elena says the protocol could work, but there's a cost. The consciousness synchronization. It's not temporary. A new set of equations appeared in the air around Sarah, generated by tears that now moved with precise, almost surgical purpose. They weren't just defending themselves anymore, they were preparing for something bigger. The Martinez Protocol wasn't just about containment, it was about evolution. Your father understood the price, Foster said softly. It's why he hesitated. But now we're out of options. Wright's approach will tear reality apart. We need someone who can communicate with them on their level, who can help them protect our dimension without destroying it. The facility's systems synchronized with the tears patterns as Wright's team prepared for their final breach. Sarah stood at the heart of it all, the daughter of a man who had glimpsed this moment years ago and prepared for it the only way he could, by making sure his child would understand the choice he had faced. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as Sarah reached for the protocol's activation controls. The tears pulsed in perfect harmony, waiting for her decision. She wasn't just fighting to protect her father's research anymore. She was standing at the threshold of humanity's next evolutionary step, about to make a choice that would reshape their understanding of consciousness itself. The emergency access door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing Dr. Elena Martinez, older than in the facility's archival footage, but carrying the same intense focus Sarah remembered from university lectures. She clutched a weathered laptop to her chest, her eyes immediately drawn to the geometric patterns of the tears floating throughout the chamber. They've evolved far beyond our original models, Elena breathed, her academic detachment warring with obvious awe. Sarah, She hesitated, years of unspoken history hanging between them. I should have told you everything sooner. Your father made me promise to wait until the tears chose someone. We never imagined they'd choose you. Another explosion rocked the facility as Wright's team breached the secondary defenses. Elena rushed to the main console, her fingers flying across the keyboards with familiar expertise. The protocol isn't just containment, she explained, pulling up complex quantum matrices. It's communication. A bridge between human consciousness and whatever vast intelligence exists on the other side of these tears. Sarah watched as new equations materialized in the air, the tears responding to Elena's presence like old friends. You've been studying them all this time, she realized, even after the government shut everything down. Your father understood what was at stake. Elena's voice carried years of carefully contained emotion. The tears aren't just random phenomena, they're part of something vast, something conscious, and they're trying to prevent a catastrophe we can barely comprehend. The facility's sensors blared new warnings as Wright's team activated their resonance grid. Reality shimmered around the artificial tears they were generating, like fabric stretching to its breaking point. The protocol requires two components, Elena continued, pulling up her father's original designs. A consciousness anchor, someone the tears recognize as compatible, and a quantum stabilization matrix to prevent dimensional collapse. James designed the matrix, but we could never find a consciousness pattern the tears would accept. Until now. Sarah felt the tears' response through her entire being, not just their presence but their purpose. They were trying to protect reality itself from human interference, but they needed human consciousness to do it. They needed her. Your father discovered it by accident, Elena explained, initiating the protocol's first phase. The tears don't just breach dimensions, They're like synapses in a vast neural network that spans multiple realities. But the network is degrading, damaged by unauthorized attempts to breach dimensional barriers. They need someone who can help them repair it. Wright's voice cut through the facility's comm system. Martinez, should have known you'd try to interfere again. The tiers are too valuable to leave in the hands of academics. Think of the military, applications, controlled dimensional warfare, temporal targeting. He still doesn't understand, Elena muttered, her hands steady as she calibrated the containment systems. The tiers aren't weapons, they're antibodies. Reality's immune system responding to our clumsy attempts at dimensional travel. The protocol's initialization sequence began, causing the tiers throughout the facility to pulse in synchronized patterns. Sarah felt each pulse resonate with her consciousness like pieces of a quantum puzzle clicking into place. Your father tested the protocol once, Elena revealed, her voice tight with old pain. His consciousness was compatible, but not completely. The tiers accepted him partially, which is why he was able to enter them but not fully synchronize. But you, Sarah, your pattern is perfect. It's what they've been waiting for. The tiers responded to Elena's words, generating complex mathematical structures that described consciousness itself, not as an emergent property of neural activity, but as a fundamental force of reality. Sarah watched in awe as the patterns aligned with human brainwave patterns, showing how the tiers had been studying humanity just as humanity had been studying them. We have minutes before Wright's equipment causes catastrophic dimensional instability, Elena warned, initiating the protocol's second phase. The tiers can protect us, but they need an anchor, a human consciousness that can help them maintain dimensional integrity while still understanding human perspective. Sarah felt the weight of the choice before her. What aren't you telling me? She asked, recognizing the same hesitation she'd seen in her father's final recordings. Elena's hand stilled on the controls. The synchronization, it's permanent. You'll still be you, but you'll also be part of them. You'll experience reality the way they do, across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your consciousness will help them protect our reality, but you'll never be able to return to a purely human perspective. The facility shuddered as Wright's team began their final approach. The tiers pulsed with increasing urgency, their patterns showing probability cascades of dimensional collapse if Wright succeeded. Sarah looked at the equations floating in the air, at Elena's haunted expression, at the legacy of her father's work, and understood what she had to do. Show me, she said quietly, stepping toward the protocol's activation chamber. Show me exactly what my father couldn't finish. The protocol's activation chamber hummed with quantum potential as Sarah stepped inside. Elena's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, but her eyes never left Sarah's face. Your father theorized that consciousness resonance could be inherited, she explained, like quantum entanglement passed down through DNA. But we never had a chance to prove it until reality rippled as Sarah reached out toward the nearest tier. The geometric patterns of its edges shifted, responding to her proximity like iron filings to a magnet. This wasn't just recognition, it was resonance on a fundamental level. The tier's mathematical structure began to mirror her own, brainwave patterns creating a feedback loop of consciousness and quantum information. Remarkable, Elena breathed, watching the readings spike across her monitors. The tiers aren't just accepting your consciousness pattern, they're synchronizing with it. This is what James predicted, but the scale of the response. A massive explosion rocked the facility. Through the security feeds, they watched Wright's team breach the main research level, their quantum resonance devices creating artificial tiers that writhed like wounded animals. But the natural tiers were responding differently now, their defensive patterns becoming more organized, more purposeful under Sarah's influence. I can feel them, Sarah whispered, watching equations write themselves in the air around her. Not just their presence, their intent. They're trying to show me something. The mathematical patterns coalesced into familiar forms. DNA helices, neural networks, quantum probability fields. But they weren't just models, they were maps of consciousness itself, showing how awareness could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your father called it quantum consciousness inheritance, Elena explained, initiating the next phase of the protocol. He theorized that his interaction with the tears changed him at a quantum level, alterations that were passed down to you. But your pattern is cleaner, more compatible. You're not just communicating with them, you're speaking their native language. Sarah watched as the tears throughout the facility began to synchronize with her presence. Each one adjusted its quantum frequency to match her consciousness pattern, creating a network of awareness that transcended normal physical limits. Through this connection, she could feel Wright's artificial tears like discordant notes in a quantum symphony, threatening to shatter the harmony of reality itself. "I understand now," she said, her voice carrying new certainty. Dad didn't just disappear into a tear. He became part of their network. But he couldn't complete the transformation. His consciousness pattern wasn't quite right. Elena nodded, grimly. The tears need an anchor in our reality, a consciousness that can bridge the gap between human understanding and their multidimensional awareness. James could interface with them, but you can become one with them while maintaining your human perspective. Wright's voice boomed through the facility. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. The tears are too powerful to be contained. They need to be controlled, weaponized, but Sarah barely heard him. The tears were showing her possibilities, probability cascades of potential futures, branching timelines where reality itself hung in the balance. She saw what would happen if Wright succeeded. Dimensional barriers shattering, the careful balance of quantum consciousness destroyed by human ambition. The resonance is reaching critical levels, Elena warned, her eyes fixed on readings that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah, if we proceed with full synchronization, there's no going back. You'll still be you, but you'll also be them. You'll experience reality the way they do, across all possible dimensions simultaneously. Sarah felt the weight of that choice, not just intellectually, but through the quantum resonance itself. The tears showed her what she would become, a bridge between human consciousness and something vast and infinite, an anchor point in a network that spanned multiple realities, just like her father had tried to be. He knew, she realized, watching, new equations form around her. He knew I would come here, that I would have the right consciousness pattern. Everything he taught me about science, about questioning reality, he was preparing me for this moment. The facility's sensors screamed as Wright's team approached the central chamber. Their artificial tears were creating cascading failures in the dimensional barriers, threatening to rip reality apart at its seams. But the natural tears responded to Sarah's presence with increasing strength, their patterns aligning with her consciousness in ways that defied conventional physics. "The protocol is ready," Elena announced, her finger hovering over the final activation sequence. "But Sarah, you need to be absolutely certain. Once we begin, your consciousness will be permanently quantum entangled with the tears. You'll be the anchor they need, but you'll never experience reality the same way again." Sarah watched as equations danced through the air. Her father's work evolved, adapted, made more perfect by the very phenomena he had sought to understand. Through the tears' quantum network, she could almost feel his presence, his scientific curiosity tempered by paternal love. He had given her the tools to understand this moment, but the choice had to be hers. Reality trembled as Wright's devices powered up for their final assault. Sarah stood at the junction of human consciousness and quantum awareness, her father's daughter in every way that mattered. The tears pulsed around her, waiting for her decision, not just as phenomena to be studied, but as conscious entities, ready to accept her as part of their vast network. The tears surrounding Sarah shifted their patterns, forming a crystalline network of quantum information. Through their resonance, she began to experience her father's final days in the facility, not as memories or recordings, but as quantum echoes preserved in the fabric of reality itself. She saw him standing where she stood now, facing the same choice, understanding the price that had to be paid. "Your father's last protocol wasn't just about containing the tears," Elena explained, her fingers moving across the facility's controls as Wright's team split up to surround them. "It was about protecting you. Everything he did, even his disappearance was preparation for this moment. The quantum echoes intensified. Sarah watched her father working through countless nights, refining equations that described consciousness as a fundamental force of reality. She saw him realize the truth about the tears. They weren't just phenomena to be studied, but conscious entities reaching out across dimensional boundaries, seeking compatible minds to help them protect the integrity of reality itself. The barrier is failing, Elena warned, watching Wright's artificial tears create spreading cracks in dimensional stability. James knew this would happen eventually, that someone would try to force the tears open without understanding what they really are. Through the tears quantum network, Sarah experienced the day everything changed, the day her father discovered that his consciousness pattern was almost, but not quite, compatible enough to fully synchronize with the tears. She felt his desperate race against time as he realized what was coming. "He didn't abandon us," Sarah whispered, understanding flowing through her like a current. "He became a temporary anchor, buying time until—" She watched through quantum memory as James Chen stepped into a tear, using his partially compatible consciousness to create a bridge that would hold reality together until a better solution could be found. Wright's voice echoed through the facility. Chen's containment protocols were short-sighted. Think bigger, controlled tears as weapons, as gateways to unlimited resources from parallel dimensions. Your father was too afraid to seize the opportunity. But Sarah saw the truth through the tears' quantum resonance. Her father hadn't been afraid. He had understood too well what was at stake. The tears showed her probability cascades of shattered realities, dimensions bleeding into each other as the careful balance of consciousness and quantum mechanics collapsed. James left a final protocol, Elena said, pulling up encrypted files that responded to Sarah's quantum signature. A way to not just contain the tears, but to help them heal reality itself. But it requires something he couldn't provide, a consciousness pattern that could maintain human perspective while fully synchronizing with their quantum network. The tears rippled with new intensity as Sarah accessed her father's last message. Not the video recordings they'd found earlier, but pure quantum information encoded in the tears themselves. She experienced his final moments not as an observer, but as a participant in his quantum consciousness. "Sarah girl," his thoughts echoed through quantum space. "I'm sorry I couldn't explain everything. The tears showed me possible futures. Hundreds of them. In every timeline where I told you the truth too soon, your natural consciousness pattern became contaminated by expectation and fear. You had to find your own way here, had to develop your own understanding of reality's underlying structure." Wright's team breached the outer chamber. Through the facility sensors, Sarah watched them positioning quantum resonance devices, crude tools trying to force open doors that could only be properly opened through understanding and harmony. "The tears are not our enemies. Her father's," Quantum Echo continued. "They're not even separate from us. They're reality's way of reaching out to consciousness itself, trying to help us evolve before we accidentally destroy everything in our attempts to breach dimensional barriers. I couldn't complete the synchronization, but I could leave breadcrumbs for someone who could, someone whose consciousness would develop the perfect resonance pattern." "Sarah," Elena's voice was urgent now, "Wright's devices are creating cascading failures in the quantum field. If we don't initiate your father's protocol soon, reality itself will start to unravel." Through the tears, Sarah felt the truth of that warning. Reality was like a fabric being pulled apart by human ambition, by the drive to control rather than understand. But she also felt something else. Her father's presence preserved in quantum consciousness, maintaining a delicate balance that couldn't last much longer. "You've already begun to sense it," his thoughts continued. "The way your consciousness naturally resonates with the tears. You inherited more than my curiosity, Sarah. You inherited a quantum pattern that evolved through my interaction with them. But yours is purer, unburdened by the preconceptions that limited my synchronization. You can do what I couldn't, become a true bridge between human consciousness and the vast quantum awareness that exists between dimensions." The facility shuddered as Wright's devices powered up to full capacity. Sarah stood at the heart of It all. Experiencing reality through both human perception and quantum consciousness. Her father had sacrificed everything to prepare for this moment, to give her the chance to make a choice based on understanding rather than fear. The tears pulsed in perfect harmony, ready to attempt what James Chen had only partially achieved. His final protocol wasn't just about containing the tears or stopping right. It was about taking the next step in human consciousness evolution, about becoming something that could help reality heal itself. The facility's quantum field rippled with increasing instability as Wright's devices forced tears open throughout the complex. Sarah stood in the center of the containment chamber, experiencing reality through both human senses and the tears. Quantum awareness. Dr. Foster's voice cut through her dual perception. Sarah, we're out of time. Foster had made her way to the control room, joining Elena at the main console. Wright's attempts to weaponize the tears are creating cascading failures in dimensional stability. We need to implement the protocol now, or there won't be anything left to save. Through the tears quantum network, Sarah felt the truth of that warning. Reality itself was beginning to fray, dimensions bleeding into each other in ways that violated fundamental laws of physics. But she also felt something else. Her father's quantum consciousness still maintaining its delicate balance, showing her the price of the choice before her. The synchronization will be permanent, Elena reminded her, fingers hovering over the protocol's initialization sequence. You won't just communicate with the tears anymore. You'll become part of their quantum network. Your consciousness will exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Like my father, Sarah said, softly, watching equations write themselves in the air around her. But she understood now that her father's partial synchronization had been just that, partial, incomplete, a temporary measure that couldn't last forever. Wright's voice boomed through the facility's speakers. Whatever Chen's protocol does, it's not worth the lost opportunity. Think of what we could do with controlled tears, military applications, resource extraction from parallel dimensions. He still doesn't understand, Foster said, checking readings on the quantum field monitors. The tears aren't tools to be used. They're part of reality's fundamental structure if he succeeds in weaponizing them. Sarah didn't need Foster to finish the thought. Through her growing connection to the tears, she could see probability cascades of shattered realities, dimensions collapsing into each other as the careful balance of consciousness and quantum mechanics failed. We could try to evacuate, Elena offered, though her tone suggested she already knew Sarah's answer. Let Wright deal with the consequences of his actions, but the tears would still be here, Sarah finished, still vulnerable to anyone who thinks they can control them without understanding what they really are. She felt her father's quantum echo resonate with that thought, his pride in her understanding, his sorrow at the burden she would have to bear. The chamber's sensors screamed as Wright's team began their final approach. Their artificial tears were creating widening cracks in dimensional stability, threatening to shatter reality's careful architecture. But the natural tears responded to Sarah's presence with increasing strength, their patterns aligning with her consciousness in ways that transcended normal physics. Your father's protocol is ready, Elena announced, her voice tight with emotion. But Sarah, you need to be absolutely certain. Once we begin, there's no going back. You'll still be you, but you'll also be them. You'll experience reality the way they do, across all possible dimensions simultaneously. Sarah felt the weight of that choice, not just intellectually, but through the quantum resonance itself. The tears showed her what she would become, a bridge between human consciousness and something vast and infinite, an anchor point in a network that spanned multiple realities. I understand now, she said, watching new equations form around her. Dad wasn't just trying to protect the tears from being weaponized. He was trying to protect humanity from itself, from our tendency to control things we don't fully understand. Foster's monitors showed Wright's team in position, their quantum resonance devices powering up for a final assault. Sarah, we need your decision. The dimensional barriers are failing. Whatever we're going to do, it has to be now. Through the tears quantum network, Sarah reached out to her father's consciousness one last time. She felt his presence, not just as memory or echo, but as pure quantum information preserved in the fabric of reality itself. You don't have to do this. His thoughts resonated through the network. I never wanted this burden for you. But Sarah understood now that this wasn't just about following in her father's footsteps or completing his work. This was about making her own choice, about accepting a responsibility that came not from inheritance but from understanding. Initialize the protocol, she commanded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was choosing. Dad tried to protect everyone by himself, but that was never going to be enough. The Tears don't need a guardian, they need a bridge. Someone who can help humanity understand them and help them understand humanity. Elena's hands moved across the controls, beginning the sequence that would permanently merge Sarah's consciousness with the Tears' quantum network. Foster worked alongside her, reinforcing the facility's failing containment systems. Through it all, Sarah stood at the heart of reality's crossroads, accepting a transformation that would forever change her relationship with existence itself. The Tears pulsed in perfect harmony, ready to complete what James Chen had only partially achieved. This wasn't just about stopping right or saving the facility. This was about taking the next step in the evolution of human consciousness, becoming something that could help reality heal itself, one quantum connection at a time. The protocol's initialization sequence had barely begun when Wright's team breached the central chamber. Reality itself seemed to shudder as their quantum resonance devices tore artificial holes in dimensional space. Sarah felt each forced tear like a wound in her consciousness as the synchronization process deepened her connection to the quantum network. "Stop the protocol," Wright commanded, leading his team through the chaos. Their tactical gear seemed to shift and distort as the facility's natural tears responded to their presence, mathematics and matter colliding in impossible ways. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." "Neither do you," Sarah responded, her voice carrying new harmonics as the protocol progressed. Through the tears' quantum awareness, she could see the damage Wright's devices were causing, not just to the facility, but to the fundamental structure of reality itself. Elena worked frantically at the controls, trying to maintain the protocol's delicate quantum balance while Foster coordinated facility defenses. But the Tears were responding to the violence in unexpected ways, their patterns shifting from defensive geometry to something more aggressive. "The Tears are merging," Elena warned, watching as multiple quantum breaches began to synchronize. "They're trying to protect themselves, but the energy release could tear the facility apart." Sarah felt it happening through her growing connection to the Tear network. The quantum consciousness she was linking with wasn't just responding to threats. It was adapting, evolving, using the chaos of Wright's assault to accelerate its own development. Each artificial tear his team created was being absorbed and transformed by the natural network. Wright raised his quantum resonance device, its barrel glowing with stolen theories and corrupted research. "Think about what we could accomplish together," he urged. "Your consciousness synchronization, my technology. We could control the Tears, use them to reshape reality itself." "Reality isn't meant to be controlled," Sarah replied, watching equations spiral through the air around her. The protocol was changing her perception, showing her the truth beneath physical existence, the quantum dance of consciousness and possibility that underpinned everything. The facility's systems began to fail as Wright's team activated their devices simultaneously. Artificial tears spread like cracks in a windshield, threatening to shatter dimensional barriers permanently. But the natural tears responded with increasing coordination, their patterns aligning with Sarah's consciousness in ways that transcended normal physics. "Sarah," Elena's voice cut through the chaos. "The protocol, it's accelerating. The Tears are using the energy from Wright's devices to speed up the synchronization process." Through her quantum-enhanced awareness, Sarah understood what was happening. The Tears weren't just defending themselves. They were turning Wright's attack into an opportunity. Each artificial breach provided more energy for the protocol, hastening her transformation into something that could bridge human and quantum consciousness. Wright must have sensed it too. He charged forward, his device powering up for a final attempt to seize control. But the tears around Sarah had begun to pulse, in perfect harmony, their mathematical patterns weaving a shield of pure quantum information. "The facility's containment grid is critical," Foster reported, her fingers flying across emergency controls. "We've got cascading failures in all systems." Sarah felt reality buck and twist as Wright's device fired, sending a beam of focused, quantum energy toward her. But the tears responded instantly, their merged consciousness working in perfect synchronization with her own. The energy beam split into its component quantum states, each one absorbed and transformed by the tear network. "Impossible," Wright breathed, watching his weapon's energy dissipate into pure mathematics. "The tears can't be this coordinated, unless—" His eyes widened as he finally understood what was happening. "You're not just communicating with them, you're becoming one with them." The protocol's energy surged through Sarah's consciousness, showing her possibilities that human perception alone could never grasp. She saw reality as the tears saw it, not as a single fixed timeline, but as an infinite dance of quantum probabilities, each one shaped by consciousness itself. "Last chance," she offered, feeling her father's quantum echo resonate with her words. "Stop this now, before the damage becomes permanent." Wright's response was to order his team to fire all devices, simultaneously. The chamber erupted in chaos as multiple quantum beams lashed out, each one trying to force reality to obey human will. But the tears had evolved beyond such crude manipulations. Sarah felt the protocol reach a critical threshold as the tears absorbed and transformed the quantum energy around her. Her consciousness expanded exponentially, experiencing multiple dimensions simultaneously. Through this enhanced awareness, she saw what needed to be done, not just to stop Wright, but to heal the damage that humanity's ambitions had caused to reality's fundamental structure. The tears merged into a single quantum field, their combined consciousness working in harmony with Sarah's transforming awareness. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as human ambition collided with quantum truth, creating a moment of possibility that would determine far more than just the fate of one hidden facility. The tear opened before Sarah, like a door made of pure mathematics, its edges defined by equations that described the fundamental nature of reality itself. Her consciousness, already partially synchronized with the quantum network, resonated with its complex geometries. She heard Elena's voice as if from a great distance. "The protocol will complete automatically once you're inside. But Sarah, no one has ever fully experienced quantum reality and remained human." Sarah stepped through the threshold, and everything she understood about existence transformed. She was no longer bound by linear time or three-dimensional space. Her consciousness expanded into a realm where thought and reality were indistinguishable. Where mathematical truth had physical form, the universe revealed itself as an infinite web of quantum possibilities, each one alive with consciousness and purpose. Sarah girl. Her father's quantum echo resonated through this impossible space, more present and real than she had ever experienced. Him through the tears before. "You've come further than I ever could." She perceived him not as a physical form, but as a pattern of quantum information preserved in the fabric of reality itself. A consciousness that had partially merged with the tear network, maintaining a delicate balance between human awareness and quantum truth. "Dad," she spoke, though speech here was more like sharing pure thought. "I understand now. Why you couldn't explain. Why I had to find my own way here." Their consciousness patterns intertwined, sharing 13 years of separation in an instant. Sarah experienced her father's discovery of the tears, his growing understanding of their true nature, and his desperate race to prevent their weaponization. She felt his love and his regret, his pride and his fear, all preserved in quantum state. But their reunion was interrupted by a discordant presence. Wright had followed her into the tear, his quantum resonance device creating dangerous distortions in the delicate mathematical fabric around them. Unlike Sarah's natural synchronization with the quantum realm, his forced entry was causing reality itself to buckle and strain. "This is incredible." Wright's voice carried the harsh edge of triumph. Direct access to quantum reality. Think of the possibilities. We could reshape existence itself. Sarah perceived the damage his presence was causing. In this realm, she could see how his attempts to control the tears were creating fractures in the quantum field, threatening to shatter the careful balance that maintained dimensional stability. The tears throughout the facility were responding, their merged consciousness working to contain the damage. He cannot remain here, her father's quantum echo warned. His consciousness isn't synchronized. His presence is creating cascading failures across multiple dimensions. Sarah understood. Through her enhanced perception, she saw reality as the tears saw it, not as something to be controlled, but as a living system of interconnected consciousness, each tear a synapse in a vast quantum nervous system. Wright's presence was like a virus threatening to corrupt the entire network. "You need to leave," she told him, her voice carrying harmonics of quantum truth. "This realm isn't meant for unsynchronized consciousness. You're causing damage you can't even perceive." "I'm not going anywhere," Wright snarled, raising his device. "This is everything we've worked for. Direct manipulation of quantum reality." But, in this realm, his technology was worse than useless. Sarah watched through quantum-enhanced awareness as the tear network responded to his attempt to force control. Reality itself seemed to recoil from his presence, mathematical patterns shifting to isolate and contain the threat he represented. Her father's quantum echo pulsed with urgent purpose. "The protocol, Sarah, it's ready, but the choice must be yours, to become what I couldn't. A true bridge between human consciousness and quantum reality." Sarah felt the protocol's completion sequence activate, resonating through her already transformed awareness. This was what the tears had been preparing for, not just communication between realities, but true synthesis, a way for human consciousness to evolve beyond its limited perception, while maintaining its essential humanity. Wright fired his device, but here, in quantum reality, energy and information were the same thing. Sarah watched as his beam split into its component possibilities, each one absorbed and transformed by her expanding consciousness. The tears throughout the facility responded in perfect harmony, their patterns aligning with her quantum state. "You still don't understand," she told Wright, experiencing multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The tears aren't weapons or tools. They're reality's immune system trying to help us evolve before we destroy everything in our attempt to control it." Reality trembled as the protocol reached its apex. Sarah felt her consciousness expand, beyond normal human limits, becoming something that could exist in both quantum and physical reality simultaneously. Through this enhanced awareness, she perceived the solution to the damage Wright and others like him had caused, not through force or control, but through understanding and harmony. "It's time," her father's quantum echo resonated. "I can't maintain this balance much longer. Reality needs a new anchor, someone who can help it heal." Sarah reached out with her transformed consciousness, feeling the tears respond to her quantum signature. She wasn't just following in her father's footsteps anymore. She was becoming something he had only glimpsed, a true bridge between human understanding and quantum truth. The protocol's completion sequence began, reality itself holding its breath as human consciousness prepared to evolve into something that could help heal the wounds that ambition and fear had torn in the fabric of existence itself. Multiple realities converged around Sarah as the protocol reached its critical point, each one a possible version of existence itself. Through her transformed consciousness, she perceived them all simultaneously. Timelines where humanity had learned to work with the tears instead of trying to control them, others where reality had shattered under the weight of human ambition. At the nexus of all these possibilities stood Wright, his quantum resonance device creating dangerous distortions in the fabric of existence. "The facility's dimensional barriers are stabilizing." Elena's voice reached her across quantum space. "Whatever you're doing in there, it's working. The tears are beginning to synchronize globally." Sarah felt the truth of that through her enhanced awareness. The tears weren't just responding to her consciousness anymore. They were accepting her as part of their vast network, using her human perspective to help guide their recovery of reality's damaged structure. "This ends now," Wright snarled, his presence in quantum space becoming increasingly unstable. I didn't spend years studying these phenomena just to watch them slip away. His device pulsed with corrupted energy, trying to force the tears to obey his will. But Sarah saw him now with both human understanding and quantum awareness. "You never really studied them at all," she said, her voice carrying harmonics of multiple dimensions. "You just saw what you wanted to see. Weapons, tools, things to be controlled. You never understood what they really are." Through the facility's quantum field, she sensed Foster and Elena working frantically to contain the physical effects of their confrontation. Reality barriers were beginning to reform, strengthened by Sarah's presence in the tier network. The protocol was using her consciousness as a template, showing the tiers how to interact with humanity without compromising their essential nature. "Sarah," Foster's voice cut through the quantum static, "the other research sites are reporting similar stabilization. The tiers are networking globally, using your consciousness pattern as a guide." Wright made his final desperate move, triggering his device to maximum power. In normal reality, it might have been devastating. But here, in quantum space, Sarah perceived the energy as information, corrupt and dangerous but ultimately transformable. Her father's quantum echo resonated with her enhanced consciousness, showing her how to respond. "You can't stop this," Wright insisted, even as his device's energy was absorbed and transformed by the tier network. "Humanity needs these weapons. The power they represent is nothing compared to what they're offering freely," Sarah completed, understanding flowing through her like a current. The tiers around them pulsed with increasing harmony as she implemented the protocol's final steps. "They're not here to give us power, Wright. They're here to help us grow up." Through her quantum-enhanced perception, Sarah began the delicate process of reality restoration. She could feel the tiers responding to her guidance, using her unique consciousness pattern, human understanding, merged with quantum awareness to repair the damage that Wright and others had caused. "The dimensional barriers are reintegrating," Elena reported. "It's like reality is healing itself." Sarah felt it happening through the tier network. Reality wasn't just stabilizing, it was evolving, developing new structures that could withstand humanity's attempts to breach dimensional barriers. The tiers were no longer just reactive defensive measures, they were becoming active participants in reality's development. "This isn't the end," Wright warned, even as his presence in quantum space began to fade. "Others will come. They'll try to harness this power." "Let them come," Sarah replied, completing another phase of the protocol. "I'll be here to show them what you couldn't see. That the real power isn't in controlling the tiers, it's in learning to work with them." Her father's quantum echo pulsed with pride and understanding as she began the final sequence. This was what he had prepared, for what all his careful preparations had been leading toward. Not just a containment solution, but a way for humanity to take its next evolutionary step. "Quantum field harmonics are stabilizing globally," Foster reported. "The tiers they're not just closing, they're transforming, becoming something new." Sarah guided the process through her unique perspective, using her human understanding to help the tiers create stable interfaces between quantum and physical reality. Through this synthesis, she could maintain both her humanity and her connection to the vast consciousness network that spanned dimensions. The protocol reached its completion point, reality reshaping itself around the new equilibrium Sarah had helped establish. Wright's presence faded entirely as the quantum realm ejected his unsynchronized consciousness, returning him to normal space where Elena and Foster waited with containment measures ready. Through the tier network, Sarah felt the changes rippling outward, touching every research site, every place where humanity had tried to breach dimensional barriers. The tiers were no longer just holes in reality. They had become windows, carefully structured gateways that could safely channel human curiosity without risking reality's fundamental structure. "It's beautiful," she whispered, experiencing existence through both human eyes and quantum awareness. The universe revealed itself as her father had begun to see it. not as something to be conquered or controlled, but as a vast, living system of interconnected consciousness, waiting for humanity to mature enough to join its network. The facility hummed with new energy as Sarah completed the final transformations. She wasn't just her father's daughter anymore, or even just a scientist. She had become something her father had only dreamed of, a true bridge between human understanding and quantum truth, helping both sides learn from each other. The facility settled into its new reality as Sarah emerged from the quantum realm. The tiers had stabilized into structured geometric patterns, their edges now defined by precise mathematical frameworks that bridged dimensions without threatening them. Through her transformed consciousness, she could feel the entire network, adjusting to the new equilibrium, not just here but at research sites across the globe. The containment readings are unlike anything we've ever seen, Elena marveled, studying displays that showed the tiers' new stable states. They're not just controlled, they're cooperative, like they've found a way to exist in our reality without straining it. Wright sat secured in the facility's containment area, his quantum resonance devices deactivated and carefully quarantined. Dr. Foster supervised his detention, while government teams began arriving to secure the facility. But these weren't the same type of forces Wright had commanded. These were scientists, researchers, people chosen for their ability to understand, rather than control. "How does it feel?" Elena asked Sarah softly, watching her former student navigate between normal and quantum perception. Being connected to them like this? Sarah considered the question, experiencing it through both her human consciousness and her new quantum awareness. "It's like learning a new language," she explained, watching equations dance through the air around her. "One that describes reality itself. I'm still me, but I can see and understand things I never could before." Through the facility's sensors, they monitored the tiers as they settled into their new forms. What had once been chaotic breaches in reality were now more like synapses in a vast neural network, each one carefully structured to allow safe interaction between dimensions. Sarah could feel them responding to her presence, adjusting their patterns to maintain perfect harmony between quantum and physical states. "Your father would be proud," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "He always believed there had to be a way to work with the tiers instead of trying to control them. He just couldn't quite see the final step." Sarah felt her father's quantum echo resonating through the tier network, no longer just a preserved pattern but part of the vast consciousness she now shared. "He did more than that," she replied. "He prepared the way. Everything he taught me about science, about questioning reality, it was all leading to this moment." Foster approached from the containment area, her professional demeanor softened by genuine wonder. "The other sites are reporting similar stabilization patterns. The tiers are creating a kind of quantum internet, using your consciousness pattern as a template for safe human interaction." Sarah demonstrated by reaching out to the nearest tier. Instead of the violent reaction such contact would have once caused, the tier responded with gentle precision, its mathematical patterns adjusting to allow controlled information exchange. "They're teaching us even as we study them," she explained, "showing us how to expand our understanding without threatening reality's structure." A team of quantum physicists had arrived to begin documenting the tier's new properties. Sarah watched them work through both physical and quantum perception, seeing how their careful, methodical approach was exactly what the tiers had been, waiting for human curiosity tempered by respect and understanding. "We'll need to establish new protocols," Foster said, already thinking ahead. "Ways to safely study the tiers without risking what Wright tried to do. Would you be willing to help us design them?" Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility through her enhanced awareness. She wasn't just a researcher anymore. She had become a bridge between humanity's scientific ambitions and the vast quantum consciousness that spanned dimensions. "Yes," she said, "but not just protocols. We need to establish a new way of thinking about our relationship with reality itself." Elena's monitors showed the facility's quantum field settling into stable patterns that would have seemed impossible just hours ago. The tears were no longer just phenomena to be studied. They had become partners in humanity's scientific journey, offering guidance while maintaining careful boundaries. "What about right?" Elena asked quietly, glancing toward the containment area. "He'll face consequences," Foster assured them. "But more importantly, his approach has been thoroughly discredited. The tears have shown us a better way forward." Sarah reached out through the quantum network, feeling the tears' vast consciousness responding to her human perspective. This was what her father had glimpsed, not just a scientific discovery, but a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship with reality itself. Through her unique position as both human scientist and quantum consciousness, she could help guide that transformation. "We're going to need a new research team," she said, watching the equations that now filled the air around her. "People who can understand that the tears aren't just objects of study. They're teachers trying to help us evolve beyond our limited perception of reality." The facility hummed with new purpose as teams began setting up long-term monitoring equipment. But unlike before, when humanity had tried to impose its will on the tears, now there was harmony. A careful balance between scientific inquiry and quantum wisdom, guided by Sarah's unique consciousness. Through it all, she felt her father's quantum echo, his pattern now permanently preserved in the vast network she had helped stabilize. He had started this journey, shown her the first steps toward understanding what the tears really were. Now she would continue that work, helping humanity learn to see reality not as something to be conquered, but as something to be understood, one quantum truth at a time. 1 month after the convergence, Sarah stood in her father's restored office, within the facility, experiencing reality through both human perception and quantum awareness. The tears had become a constant presence in her consciousness, their vast network of information and understanding, complementing rather than overwhelming her human perspective. On her desk lay the final piece of her father's legacy, a quantum-encoded message that had waited for this moment to reveal itself. "Are you ready?" Elena asked from the doorway. She and Foster had been instrumental in establishing the facility's new research protocols, creating a framework that balanced scientific inquiry with ethical responsibility. Sarah nodded, reaching out to the nearest tier with both physical touch and quantum consciousness. The message decoded itself through this dual connection, revealing her father's final thoughts not as simple words, but as a complex tapestry of quantum information and human emotion. "Sarah girl," his consciousness pattern resonated through the network. "If you're experiencing this, then you've succeeded where I could only prepare the way." The tears showed me possibilities, hundreds of them. But in every timeline where humanity tried to control them, reality itself began to break down. We needed something else. Someone who could understand them not as phenomena to be managed, but as conscious entities reaching out across dimensional boundaries. Through the facility's sensors, Sarah monitored the global network of tears she now helped coordinate. Research teams worldwide were learning to work with them properly, guided by the protocols she had helped develop. The tears were no longer seen as potential weapons or power sources, but as partners in humanity's evolution of consciousness. "The Oversight Committee has approved our revised research structure," Foster reported, joining them with a tablet full of data. Full transparency about the tears' conscious nature, but carefully controlled information about the technical details. "We don't want another right situation." Sarah felt the rightness of that decision through both her scientific training and quantum understanding. "The tears will help us know who's ready," she said. "They can sense consciousness patterns, distinguish between those who seek to understand and those who seek to control." Elena studied the quantum displays that now filled the office, showing the tears' stable geometric patterns. "Your father would be amazed to see this. We spent years trying to achieve even basic communication with them, and now they're teaching us," Sarah completed, feeling the vast quantum network pulse with potential, showing us how to expand our consciousness without losing our humanity. She turned to the final section of her father's message, experiencing it through the full spectrum of her enhanced awareness. "The tears aren't just anomalies or accidents," his quantum echo continued. "They're reality's way of reaching out to conscious beings, helping them evolve beyond their dimensional limitations. I couldn't complete the connection. My consciousness wasn't quite compatible enough. But you, Sarah, you have both the scientific foundation and the natural resonance pattern they need. You're not just my daughter anymore. You're the bridge between what humanity is and what it can become. Sarah shared the message's quantum information with Elena and Foster, letting them experience its truth through the Tears network. This was what the facility would become, not just a research center, but a place of learning and growth where humanity could safely take its first steps toward expanded consciousness. We're already seeing changes in how people think about quantum physics, Foster noted. The papers you've allowed us to publish, even with the technical details obscured, are reshaping our understanding of consciousness itself. That's just the beginning, Sarah replied, watching new equations form in the air around her. The Tears were constantly sharing insights, teaching humanity lessons it had struggled for centuries to understand. We're learning to see reality as it really is, not just matter and energy, but consciousness and possibility. Through her quantum awareness, she felt her father's pattern, preserved forever in the vast network she now helped guide. He had given her more than just scientific knowledge or genetic quantum resonance. He had shown her a path between human ambition and cosmic wisdom, between the drive to understand and the wisdom to respect what they discovered. The new research teams arrive next week, Elena reminded her. Scientists chosen not just for their technical skills, but for their consciousness patterns. People who can learn to work with the Tears safely. Sarah nodded, feeling the quantum network's approval of their selections. This was her inheritance, not just the facility or the Tears, but the responsibility to guide humanity's next steps into expanded consciousness. She would be their teacher, their interpreter, helping them understand the delicate balance between knowledge and wisdom. Dad once told me that the universe has a way of hiding its most interesting secrets behind instrument failures, she said, smiling at the memory while feeling its quantum resonance. He was right, but not in the way he thought. The Tears weren't hiding. They were waiting for us to be ready to understand them as they truly are. The facility hummed with new purpose as Sarah completed her father's final message. Through the Tears network, she felt the vast potential of what they had begun, humanity's first steps toward a deeper understanding of consciousness itself. She was no longer just searching for answers about her father's disappearance. She had become something more, a bridge between human science and quantum consciousness, helping guide both toward a future her father had only dreamed possible. The Tears pulsed with harmonic energy, their patterns reflecting the perfect balance she had helped achieve. Not an ending, but a beginning, humanity's first true steps into a larger reality, guided by the daughter of a man who had dared to look beyond the boundaries of known physics and into the very consciousness of reality itself. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.